Welcome, everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic and untimely passing of Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, who died just 5 days ago at the age of 29. It's a terrible loss for the chess community, and I think many of us are still in shock. I never had the privilege of knowing or interacting with Daniel personally, but by all accounts, he was a true gentleman, kind, humble, and generous with his time and knowledge. He was also, without question, my favorite chess YouTuber. Daniel had a rare gift for explaining the game in a way that resonated with everyone, whether you were a titled player, a 2000, a 1700, or just starting out at 800. His videos were instruction-rich, never clickbait, and they've become an invaluable resource for adult improvers and chess enthusiasts of all levels. My deepest condolences, thoughts, and prayers are with the Naroditsky family during this incredibly difficult time. As we carry on with today's episode, I hope we can all take a moment to appreciate the impact Daniel had on so many of us who love this game.
Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Not too much club business this week. There is one thing, but I'm going to save that for one of the questions in the mailbag segment because it relates to that. So I'm going to sort of postpone that for when we get to it. And that being said, let's jump right into the mailbag. Our first message is from Evan. He says, "Hey there, I've really been enjoying the Chess Angle. It's been both helpful and encouraging as someone who only started playing chess seriously this year. I'm actually about to start attending my local chess club here in Lakeway, Texas. They meet once a month, and it'll be my first real over-the-board experience. Up to now, most of my friends, quote-unquote, know how to play, but really just know how the pieces move. I'm not that far behind myself, but I've learned enough to start seeing strategy and winning a few games, which makes it all the more exciting. I also picked up one of those electronic boards that connect to chess.com and Lichess for about $160, and it's been a game changer. Playing on a real board while it syncs to my games has helped me visualize much better. Curious if you've tried one yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I chose the Chestnut Go. Appreciate the work you're doing with the podcast. It's a great companion for anyone trying to improve and stay motivated. Thanks again, Evan." Well, I appreciate the kind words, Evan. I'm glad you're enjoying the pod. And a big shout out to all of our friends down south in Texas. That's great that we have some listeners there. I haven't played on one of those boards, the Chestnut Go or whatever it is. I forget the generic term for those. I'm not sure I would use it. I mean, I guess I would. I know that might sound strange. I'm just kind of used to playing on the computer, just looking at the screen because I've been doing it for so long. But I am curious. Maybe at some point I'll try it, but I really can't respond, Evan, in detail, like I said, because I haven't used it. But I'm really glad you're enjoying it. I know many other players are as well, and that's fantastic. It sounds like you're really enjoying the game, which is what it's all about. It sounds like you're enjoying playing over the board. So that's fantastic, and thanks for checking in, Evan. I really appreciate it. Our next message is from Tim. This is a follow-up because he was asking about the puzzles on chess.com and the puzzle rating, and shortly after his original message, chess.com came out with an article saying that they fixed that as far as the puzzle difficulty and the puzzle rating, because apparently the puzzle rating was very inflated. People felt it wasn't realistic. Chess.com claims that that's been fixed. So this is Tim's follow-up email. He says, "Thank you for answering my message on the podcast. I haven't read the article about the new puzzles on chess.com, but before I heard your podcast, I did notice that chess.com has made changes to them. It's hard to give a definitive judgment on them as I think more time is needed for this. However, at first glance, and after using it for a couple of days, it seems to have improved. They significantly lowered everybody's puzzle rating to reflect their real rating more, and have changed the rating of the puzzles themselves also. Time will tell if my puzzle rating will stay this way, though, as I can imagine that over time, everybody's puzzle rating will again skyrocket back up. Let's hope that does not happen. Then, about your advice to try Lichess puzzles, I have tried them as well, and I like their puzzles. Thanks for the advice. Yep, Lichess puzzles are very good. A lot of people are really into them. They feel they're a little more realistic. And as far as the whole puzzle thing, I'm not a big fan of the whole like puzzle rating thing, just because playing in an over-the-board rated tournament, the whole mindset, the whole ecosystem, that whole environment, it's completely different from sort of sitting at home with a cup of coffee and doing puzzles online. I mean, I guess it's a guide, but I'm one of these people, I'm not really going to obsess over a puzzle rating. My bigger concern, and I haven't checked this out on chess.com yet, to be honest, I just hope the puzzles are more realistic in as far as difficulty and as far as the rating. In other words, if people put in a puzzle that should be difficult, that it really is difficult, that type of thing. But apparently, like you said, they have gone through the effort of fixing it, and hopefully it's okay now. But thanks for following up, Tim. I appreciate it. Our next message is sort of a passing note, if you will. This is from Greg. He bought us 5 coffees on Buy Me a Coffee. Thanks so much, Greg, for supporting the show. I really appreciate it. That's very generous. He had left a message on our Buy Me a Coffee page and also via email. If you're interested in supporting the show, just look for our Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. And Greg writes, "Hi, Neil. Just wanted to let you know we have featured the chess angle on our new website for the Sudbury Suffolk Chess Club. I hope it brings you a few more listeners from the UK. Keep up the good work. It's a great show." Well, thanks so much, Greg. I appreciate the shout out. And I have to say, after the United States, our most popular demographic as far as countries is the UK. It's the United States first, of course, no surprise. Then it's the UK, and then Canada's next. So we have quite a following in the UK. Shout out to our friends across the pond. You guys are awesome. I think that's great that the club is doing well, Greg. And again, I appreciate the featured article. That's really cool. Thanks again for the coffees, and stay in touch. Our final message this week is from Terry, and it has to do with playing kids at tournaments, particularly annoying chess kids. So Terry's coming in a little bit hot here, but I think we can all relate to at least part of what he's saying. Maybe some of you can relate to most of it. But anyway, Terry writes, "Annoying chess kids. Hi, Neil. What are your thoughts on the bad rep kids have in OTB chess? I've seen kids cry after losing a game or blundering. Sometimes they'll even have a little outburst or quote-unquote rage moment. I admit playing with kids can be annoying sometimes. It definitely takes some getting used to and requires more patience than the actual game itself. I tend to give kids a pass on a lot of things that I wouldn't accept from an adult. But I have friends in chess that avoid kids like the plague, and I absolutely get it. Most of the issues I've had with kids center around poor etiquette. For example, not covering their mouth for a cough, a yawn or a sneeze, swinging their feet and kicking me every 5 minutes, the fidgeting, tapping on the table, playing with the captured pieces like toys, stacking rooks, headbutting the knights, trying to spin pawns and bishops. These are the usual minor offenses that grind my gears after extended exposure. For me, the more egregious offenses happen when kids are eating and drinking at the board. They get messy, sticky fingers after snacking and continue playing and get their nasty prints all over my chess set. I usually play with my own set. It's a different color and a little nicer and bigger than the ones kids see all the time, so they like playing on it. However, from time to time, I'll notice kids will get too fidgety with my pieces. I've seen kids picking at the felt material on the bottom of my pieces just to see if it would come off, and for some inexplicable reason, these kids love placing the extra queen in between their nose and upper lip like a mustache, rolling it up and down. I don't know. It's weird. I used to do that with pencils when I was a kid. Anyway, that's what annoys this old man about some of these chess kiddos. I've learned to keep a small pack of Lysol wipes and hand sanitizer with my set, and I don't care if I look like a chess snob for using them after each game. All right. So Terry's coming in hot, baby. I love it. No, listen, I understand your frustrations, and, I've heard this before, so you're definitely not alone. So what I'm going to do, Terry, I'm going to kind of give you my own incidents with kids. I haven't had too many, but there's two that I recall as a player, and then just some general thoughts about playing kids in general. But before we do that, I just want to interject with something first. Now, where you say I tend to give kids a pass on a lot of things that I wouldn't accept for an adult, I think we need to stop doing that. And I notice that. I notice this all the time where adults, they feel, they're afraid to say something when a child is their opponent and is violating etiquette. Maybe they don't want a scene. Maybe they don't want to turn it into a thing because it's going to involve the parents. But giving these kids a pass is part of the problem of why this is an issue with tournaments. We have to call them out, and their behavior has to be addressed. Also, as far as not covering their mouth for a cough and swinging their feet and fidgeting and tapping on the table, absolutely true. But I just want to be fair here. I know many adults who've done that as well. I mean, even at our club, we have a few happy tappers. We have a few tap dancers, and, they're adults. Like, they'll be thinking, or I'll be thinking, and they go tap, tap, tap. And especially if they don't cut their fingernails, it's like a really loud tap. And I'll tell them, I'll even say, like, stop tap dancing or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll let it go for a second, but if they keep doing it, I'm going to say something. And just remember, if they're doing something that bothers you and you don't say something, it's going to continue. So believe it or not, I've seen adults actually behave this way as well. I just want to be fair. But of course, when kids do it, if they're deliberately misbehaving, there is something particularly annoying about that, especially at a chess tournament. As I mentioned before, I'll talk about two incidents I had with kids. So the first one, and I mentioned this a long time ago in one of the first episodes, I think it was maybe the second episode of this podcast. This was in a weekend over the board tournament. I was fairly new to tournaments. I wasn't a tournament director yet. I didn't have too much experience. I was lower rated. I didn't start the club yet. Was this this might have been I think this was at Foxwoods many years ago. And I had an opponent. He was a young kid, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. And he cheated. I mean, I'll put the word cheated in quotes. He cheated, quote unquote, by flipping back through his scorebook to look at a previous game that used the same opening. I think it was a French defense. This was shortly after I decided that against E4, I was pretty much going to play the French. He starts flipping back through his book in his lap, and it was obvious that, he was trying to see if he had a similar position and what the moves were. Now, this is one of the issues I have with these scorebooks where you have previous games in it, because it's almost like having a resource with you. I don't really know if those should be allowed. That's a separate discussion for another day. But anyway, he starts looking through it, and I will tell you, back then, I didn't really handle it properly. Like I said, I was still a fairly newer, weaker player myself. I basically looked at him and I'm like, what are you doing? I go, you can't flip through that. And then the guy next to me, it was like this big guy, like, big, stocky guy, the beard, kind of intimidating looking. He jumps in. This guy next to me was like more upset about this than I was. So he starts getting involved, and he turns to the kid. He's like, yeah, you can't do that. I basically look at him and I'm like, what's going on? And then the kid seemed all frazzled, because usually, kids in those situations, they either get defiant, like, I didn't do anything, or they, it's sort of a deer in the headlights, and he was the latter. And he then put his scorebook down, and you could tell he was frazzled, and we continued playing. He ended up blundering after, because I think he was either just embarrassed or nervous because he got caught. However, I will tell you that wasn't the proper way to handle it. What I should have done, and what I would have done now, if I saw that, I would have said, that's cheating. You're trying to flip through your scorebook to look at a previous game that used the same opening. I would have paused the clock, called over a tournament director, and I would have said, this is what he did. Now, what I would have wanted to have happened, like this is how I would handle it now. I don't think the TDs from what I hear would handle it this way. But what I would say I want the game adjudicated. He attempted to cheat by looking through a scorebook. I want a rated win. I want the game adjudicated. And by right, he should be at a minimum disqualified from the next round. And that's what I would have wanted. But I have a feeling with what I'm hearing with a lot of these TDs, they probably would have just given the kid a warning. I don't think they would have adjudicated the game. I think that's what the ruling should be because we need to send the message. But that's how I would have handled it today. I would have paused the clock, gotten the TD, and if the TD said, well, I'm not adjudicating the game, I would have made a big spectacle about that. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten my way, but to give him just a warning for something like that, I don't think that's right. I'm not saying ban him for a year or anything like that, or kick him out of the tournament, maybe. But at a minimum, the game should have been adjudicated, a warning, and ideally disqualified from the next round. Like the message has to be sent. That's how I would have handled it today. But if something like that did happen today again, I would guess a lot of these TDs would just give him a warning. I don't know. This is speculation. I haven't played in one of these major weekend events in a while. But anyway, that was my first incident with a kid as far as something negative. The second one, and I still remember this, it's amazing as chess players how we remember these games. I even remember the position. So this was at another tournament. I was playing, he was being one of these, like slamming the pieces, like when he would capture a piece, he would like click them really loud, like just really annoying mannerisms. And then he blundered and I get this completely winning position and he starts crying. And I mean, not for a second, like hands over his face, crying. And I get it. I understand they're kids. And I was being very professional. I wasn't like saying, oh, like stop crying. I was just like, okay, what am I going to do? He's crying, but he kept doing it. And he was acting and he was like slamming the pieces even more like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like that whole attitude, this is ridiculous. Again, I should have maybe said something. I should have paused the clock and got to TD and said, look, I understand, he's upset, but like this continued crying, it is kind of distracting and you maybe see it. I would have handled it like in a classy way, but I would have said something because this was going on for several minutes. I didn't say anything at the time because, again, this was back in the day when I was less experienced and less worldly about tournament rules and things like that. But this is why I'm annoyed to this day. I let it get to me so much and it annoyed me so much that I blew the one position and I ended up drawing. And of course, once the position turned around and we drew, he stops crying. Oh yeah, I was going to he starts almost like talking smack. Yeah, I was going to attack you here. I was more annoyed at the fact that I let it get to me and blew the win than the fact that the crying was distracting me. So that was my other incident with kids. And I have to say, and I'm really not just saying this, at the Long Island Chess Club, we're pretty fortunate that these types of behaviors rarely happen. Most of the kids are very mature, very professional, good families. We did have a little bit of a situation recently that I want to talk about, but for the most part, I have to say we're pretty blessed. And I think as far as that type of behavior, it does seem to be more prevalent at the weekend tournaments than at the club events. So anyhow, just some sort of final thoughts about kids, just to kind of summarize this. Here's what I would say to Terry and others. When you're playing somebody at a rated tournament, doesn't matter if it's an adult or a child, age is irrelevant. If that person is misbehaving or violating etiquette or distracting you, you need to call out their behavior. Now, in some instances, you might be able to say something, but if not, pause the clock and call the TD over. In a rated event, I don't know about FIDE, but I assume so, but for a U.S. chess rated event, you have the right to pause your clock and call over a tournament director and get a ruling if you think something is wrong. But the problem is, and I can tell you as a tournament director and a player, I see this all the time. Most adults do nothing. They won't say anything, but they'll complain afterwards. And at that point, nothing can be done. So they'll play the game. Their opponent, whether it's a child or an adult, it really doesn't matter. Their opponent will exhibit distracting behavior. They won't say anything. They mark the score on the pairing chart. And then on the way out, I'll get, Neil, he was like fidgeting the whole time, Neil, he was like standing over the board the whole time, or whatever it is. And I'm like, why didn't you say anything? I go, why are you telling me this now? I go, why didn't you pause the clock and call me over? And then they just look at me. They have no response to that. Like I don't get it. You need to say something at that moment. Okay. You don't have to make a scene. You can be professional about it, but you have the right to pause the clock and call over a TD if something's not right, because that's the time to handle it. Because then I could say, all right, I'm giving you a warning. You need to stop doing that. And then you can enjoy your game and not get distracted. So you can't wait till the game is over and then complain about it, because then there's nothing we can do. And the next thing I'll say is many people, myself included, avoid weekend tournaments for this reason. And it's not like it's not that they avoid it because they don't like playing kids. They just don't like playing those types of kids who behave that way. And you really don't get this, as I mentioned earlier, at the weekly club events as much in my experience. Maybe you will, but generally you don't. This type of behavior seems to be more prevalent, in the major weekend events. At our club, if I do happen to notice this behavior, I will say something. Now, I'm blessed that it's rare, but even last night, we had someone, and very, very, very nice kid. It wasn't, I could tell it wasn't done maliciously. It was more inadvertent. They are kids after all, but he was kind of just getting up a lot, fidgeting, like standing over the board and leaning over. And I basically said, like, you need to sit. Like, if you're at the board, just, have a seat, stop tapping. And then he did, and it was fine. I don't want to be sort of a helicopter TD type of thing. None of us do. We kind of want the games to be, played and resolved and dealt with the players themselves. But if I really notice something, I am going to step in and say something, because some TDs might be like, well, I'm only going to say something if the other guy complains. But I know a lot of people, they just don't want to say something. And I'll just say, politely, just make sure if you're at the board, just make sure you're sitting and, you can't tap your pen. And, if you want to get up, that's fine. But when you're at the board, you kind of have to just like sit quietly. You can't sort of stand and, lean over the board and fidget, that type of thing. And if you say it very nicely and professionally, they will generally comply. So you make a good point, Terry. It's a good question. I know that, it can be an issue. As I said, I've been fortunate in my experience that 98% of the kids that we have at the club and kids I've played have been very well behaved, no issues. And it's only been a small amount, but depending on the types of tournaments you play in, it could be more than that. But again, I'm a little biased because I'm mostly a club person. I'm not really a weekend type of guy anymore. But thanks so much, Terry, for chiming in and sharing your thoughts. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back in just a moment. And now back to the show. All right, so our main topic this week is actually a game analysis. I haven't done one of these in a while. I know many of you have kind of written in saying that you kind of like these, so I'll try to do more of these. I'll try to keep it in mind. I'm actually at a point where I have quite a number of things to talk about. I got a number of episodes lined up. I don't know, the wheels are turning. Sometimes the wheels aren't turning, but lately the wheels have been turning. And what I will do, I will post a PGN of this game in the show notes in case you want to check it out. Some players like to plug it in an engine and look at it, or sometimes they look at it while they listen to this. You certainly don't have to. This is meant to be a standalone podcast. Maybe you're in the car or walking the dog. But if you want to look at the game, it's there. What I do in these game analysis episodes is I don't go move by move. This isn't blindfold chess. It's more about what were the takeaways from this game? What can we learn from it? What did I learn from it? What did I do well? What did I do poorly? What do I have to remind myself of? Things like that. Let's start with the opening. Now, my opponent was about 1350-ish, something like that. Let's talk about the Nimzo-Indian Defense, because that was this opening. It's one of my favorite openings. It's my main response to D4 and C4. I either use that or the Queen's Indian, depending on how quickly white plays either knight C3 or knight F3. And of course, the Nimzo and Queen's Indian can be used as a complete defense to the d4 pawn. Now you may say, well, wait a minute, what if white plays something other than c4? Like usually the Nimzo-Indian or Queen's Indian is when white plays, d4 and c4. But what about against the London or the Kali or some of these other d4 sidelines? Well, guess what? You can still use the Nimzo and Queen's Indian against those, particularly the Queen's Indian. The Queen's Indian defense is a true system opening because you can play that against anything other than e4. I mean, you could play it against e4, sort of, kind of, not really, because, e4 knight f6 is Alekhine's defense or Alekhine's attack. But against anything other than e4, you can play a Queen's Indian type setup, which is also what they call a hedgehog setup. I've discussed that before. Yeah, I mean, against d4, you're pretty much set with the Nimzo and the Queens. Nimzo is a little more specific. That's usually against d4 and c4, but a Queen's Indian or a hedgehog setup, you can use that against almost anything. That's usually my go-to. I usually do very well with it. A lot of amateurs with the white pieces don't know how to handle it. Now, let's talk about the basics of the Nimzo-Indian defense. So basically, after d4, black plays knight f6. That's the basis of any Indian defense. And with these defenses, this is sort of a hyper-modern idea, the ideas of Aaron Nimzovich, where you're controlling the center with pieces rather than pawns. So after d4, of course, white wants to get in e4, right? The whole point of the opening in the traditional sense is that white wants to get in d4 and e4, and black wants to prevent it. So instead of d5, like d4, d5, that's more traditional, you're covering the e4 square with a piece. So d4, knight f6. So you're controlling e4, and you're getting a piece out of the way and developed so that you can castle. This is why I like the Nimzo-Indian defense, because it's very smooth development for black. He castles early. It's just very easy to know what to do. So anyway, the Nimzo, d4, knight f6, c4, and then e6. And what e6 does, you're getting the dark squared bishop out, because what's going to happen is white then plays knight c3, and then we go bishop b4, excuse me. And what bishop b4 does, it pins the knight to the king, and this way white cannot play e4. So in other words, by playing the bishop to b4, which is the signature Nimzo-Indian move, you're controlling the e4 square because the knight is pinned. Black will almost always, almost like 99.99% of the time, is going to chop the knight on c3, regardless, or irregardless, as my Aunt Teresa used to say, regardless of whether you're going to double white's pawns or not. Because, for two reasons. By chopping the knight on c3, you're adding more control over e4, but also you're getting a tempo for development. So after bishop takes c3 by black, white obviously has to recapture, and then black can castle or play a developing move. So the reason I like the Nimzo-Indian, again, as I just mentioned, it's very smooth and quick development. Now, you may say, well, aren't you giving up the two bishops? Now, you know how I feel about that. I think the whole idea of, I have the two bishops, most overrated positional idea and concern at the amateur level. You're not going to get blown off the board because your opponent has the two bishops, not at our level, okay? That's like so overrated. But in this case, just for the sake of thoroughness, black is happy to give up the two bishops because he's getting smooth development and easy piece play. That's the whole idea with the Nimzo. So you go bishop takes c3, you're giving up the bishop for the knight, then you castle, you get very easy development in exchange for the two bishops, which again is like overblown as far as I'm concerned, because most amateurs are not going to really have the chops to do anything meaningful with it. Because knowing you have the two bishops and that you're supposed to, quote unquote, have some kind of advantage, and being able to find the right moves to use that advantage are two completely different things. But anyway, black is happy to give up the dark squared bishop for the knight. And that's basically the idea with the Nimzo. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. That's the basics of the Nimzo-Indian. Again, black's going to castle. He has control over e4. Now, what are some ideas for black? He can go b6 and then bishop b7 because Phi kettoing the light squared bishop adds more control over e4. And then another idea is that the knight on f6 hops to e4. The knight actually lands on the e4 square. And the whole thing is you're controlling that square so that white can never get in e4. You usually follow up with something like maybe d6, knight bd2, and then where the queen goes kind of depends. You can look to hit with like d4, d5 rather, or c5. Again, it really depends on what variation white plays. You just got to be a little bit careful as black because remember, the queen, white's queen, is open on that d1 a4 diagonal. So you got to be careful of queen a4 check. That's always a threat with the Nimzo because what happens is when white goes queen a4 check, it's hitting the bishop on b4. And in some cases, black can go knight c6 to protect it. But you just want to be careful. So when you move, before you castle, when you move the d pawn, you're opening that diagonal towards your king, which is why I generally castle almost immediately. Like if white goes queen c2, I just play castles. So like d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e4. After queen c2, just castle. You're fine. That's usually how I play there. That's the basics of the Nimzo-Indian. Okay, you're willing to give up that dark squared bishop early, again, for smooth development and easy piece play. So with the Nimzo, with the black pieces, there's no sense of like, oh, I don't know what to do, I'm confused. Now, one other thing, and this is from white's point of view, and this happened in the game, after bishop b4 and the knight is pinned, white made a very common beginner mistake. He blocked the pin with bishop d2. That's not considered the best move because what happens is black will chop, bishop takes c3, and then he goes bishop takes c3, and then black goes knight e4. And the knight sits really nicely on e4. It attacks the bishop. Now, I know the computer's going to say it's fine, but positionally, it's actually very, very nice for black, and white sort of gives up the fight when he plays that. But that whole bishop d2 on move 4, very, very common at the amateur level, but it's something you want to avoid. After bishop b4, you want to play something like e3 or queen c2, something like that. You could even play knight f3, things like that. I mean, it's usually the book move here is generally queen c2 or e3. Those are your strongest responses. But he did play bishop d2, and then I chopped and then played knight e4. So something to keep in mind there. I see this a lot, especially with low-rated players. The other thing you have to watch out for with the white pieces here is if black does get the knight to e4, you have to be careful if you try to kick it away with f3. Because remember, f3 opens up the h4, e1 diagonal towards white's king. So in other words, after knight e4 by black, if white hits it with f3, you have to watch out for those queen h4 check ideas by black. And remember, in combination with the knight on e4, that f2 square could be a mating square. All right. So again, as white, just to summarize, f3 opens up queen h4 check ideas. You got to be very, very careful about that. So to prevent that queen check, white will actually sometimes play knight h3, and then f3 is okay because then queen h4 check is not going to be a problem. But that's an idea you need to be aware of. Basically, black needs to be aware of the queen a4 check ideas if he didn't castle yet, and white needs to be aware of the queen h4 check ideas. Okay, if he didn't castle. That's very, very common in the Nimzo. You can kind of catch some beginners if they play that f3 move where it's not warranted. The other takeaway from this game is kind of what I talked about last week. We've spoken about tactics and the idea that in most of your amateur games, it's going to be about basic tactical shots. Whenever you have a winning tactical move in an amateur game, it's usually something very, very basic, a 1 to 3 move idea, simply because your opponent blundered. It's not going to be something that's really deep and hard to find. And in this game, I had a very basic removal of the defender tactic, which won a pawn. And I'll say it again for the 100th time, amateur games are all about basic tactical shots. All right. And actually, as a little side note, we might talk about tactics in detail next week, or if not next week, definitely coming up, because I think I have enough material for a standalone episode on that, because I think there's some interesting discussions about tactics at the amateur level. I think in a lot of ways it gets overblown. We'll hold that for another time, but that is going to be coming up. And then the other thing in this game, we spoke about this last week as well, is the idea of indecision, like decision fatigue and perfectionism, obsessing over the best move. There was one instance where I could have won a pawn with either bishop takes e4 or knight takes e4. And I was proud of myself. I didn't obsess because I was looking and I'm saying both seem good. Both seem to have an advantage. I'm not really seeing one better than the other. And it turns out when I put it in the engine, they're both pretty much valued equally. I decided to take with the bishop, which is perfectly fine. But if I had taken with the knight, that would have been fine also. And I didn't obsess over it. In the past, I would have wasted like 12 minutes on this for no reason. The other takeaway from this, we're talking about tactics, is you don't want to walk into a tactic because you think you're playing a tactic of your own. Let me say that a little bit better. You don't want to make a move that looks like a tactical shot, but then your opponent has a response that can turn the tables. And in my case, in this game, my opponent walked into a self-pin. So let me explain that. My opponent played this knight move that seemed like a tactical shot because his rook was on the same file as my queen, and there was a pawn in front of my queen. So he moves his knight to attack my queen, and the pawn's hitting it diagonally, but of course I can't go pawn takes knight because it's pinned. He would take my queen. So he thought this knight move was really strong because I couldn't take the knight. But what he didn't see was that his queen is now behind the knight. I simply slide my queen over, and now his knight is pinned, and he's going to lose it. So you always have to say, okay, if I play this move that looks like a winning tactical shot, does he have a way out of it? Can he slip out of it? Can he be slippery and turn the tables? And he had played this knight e5 move, and I simply go queen e6. I simply slide my queen over. So now my queen and pawn are attacking his knight. His queen is behind it, and he's going to lose a piece because he can't defend the knight and protect the loss of his queen. Because remember, most tactics are based on a double threat. Like you're threatening two things, and they can only save one of those things. That's probably 99% of tactics. Okay, it's some sort of double attack, and again, the defending player can't take care of both. He can't move his knight because there's no squares he can move it to that guard his queen, and he's just going to lose a piece, right? If he moves his knight, he loses a queen. If he leaves it where it is, he's going to lose. So his quote-unquote tactical shot allowed me to turn the tables and turn it into a self-pin. So whenever you play these moves, you have to look at your opponent's responses. You got to say, okay, if I play this, what does he have? Can he get out of it? You really, really have to check it. And I know for myself, I've won games and I've lost games over this idea where you're so sure that this tactic works, and then he has this response that you didn't see, and he turns the tables around completely. It happens. So this was a double question mark blunder where he thought he was hitting my queen, but I ended up winning his knight. And the last thing I'll say, it's interesting. I guess this game is sort of a practical example of a lot of the things we talked about last week. When you're completely winning, don't get fancy. There's no need to. When you're completely winning, your goal should just be to stop counterplay. Stop your opponent's ideas. Stop their counterattack. Don't let them start anything, and then their position's going to completely fall apart. So when you're completely winning, don't get fancy. Don't look for this amazing combination that you saw in a book. Like you're winning or you're up a piece, you're up material. Just consolidate, simplify, and your opponent's position is going to crack. But again, the most important thing, stop any and all counterplay, and then they'll have nothing. And in fact, their bad position might easily get worse. There's no need to force things. No one's going to give you a trophy or more rating points or a medal if you beat your opponent in 35 moves as opposed to 27 moves, okay? You don't get any more rating points depending on how nice the win was or on how long it took you. Don't worry about how much, worry about how. Just get it done. And that's what they talk about in Chess for Tigers. You'd rather play your own game, and let's say you take an extra 8 moves to win, than try to find the best computer line because it's a quicker win, but then you mess it up. There's no need to. Don't get fancy. If you're winning, just consolidate. And that's what I did in this game. In the past, that would have been an issue for me, either because of impatience or ego. I've since overcome that and went on to win the game after being up material. If you take a look at the PGN, you'll see some of these ideas of the Nimzo-Indian. You'll see some of these tactical ideas, and you'll actually see in the opening, I actually missed something where he actually could have gotten a little bit of an advantage. I had played this, I'm going back a little bit, I had played this queen move, and if he hits with d5, he actually gets like a 2.0 advantage. I didn't really see it. It was kind of a weird pawn center thing, and I'm lucky he didn't see it. And so I took a real hard look at that because, I was kind of upset that I missed it because a stronger player may have seen it. So if you look at it, it's move 13. I played queen d7. It wasn't a good idea because then he plays d5. So I sort of dodged a bullet there. That was my one, not blunder, but it was kind of a one question mark move. That's how it goes. It's an interesting game to look at if you want to. At any rate, thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.